Welcome to Between Two Chairs, Demystifying Commercial Real Estate, the podcast that brings you the latest insights and trends on the South Florida commercial real estate market, with your hosts, Fernando Arencibia Jr. and Jennifer Woolman. In each episode, we dive into the world of commercial real estate and break down complex concepts to make them accessible for everyone. Whether you're a real estate professional, a curious investor, or just interested in the South Florida market in general, Between Two Chairs is the podcast for you. So pull up a chair and join us.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Between Two Chairs. My name is Fernando Arencibia Jr., and with me, as always, is the insert amazing adjective, Jennifer Woolman. Oh, I think I wasn't supposed to read that.
You're so funny. Hello, everybody. I'm here with my goofy co-host.
Yeah.
Always happy, always fun. Always F1. We were listening to the F1 updates right before this. Fernando Arencibia.
That's right. That's right. I love watching a race in 5 minutes. After watching the full race. So, Jennifer, today we are fresh off a couple of conferences, the Florida Realtors Annual Conference and Convention and Governance Meetings, which took place last week. And immediately after, you stuck around in Orlando for the ICSC conference. So I know today we're going to kind of dive into a little bit of some of the ideas, some of the conversation topics, some of the items that we feel would be interesting to our listeners about what we saw at Florida Realtors and ICSC. Give us a little rundown. What were your original thoughts on? I know you got to see and attend a few sessions during the Florida Realtors Conference.
I did. So there was a lot, obviously, on the residential side between form changes and everything else. But on the overall real estate side, my favorite conversation by far was the interview that Gia Arvin, president of Florida Realtors, had with Karl Rove and David Plouffe. Mm-hmm. And for those of you who don't know, Karl Rove is the senior advisor and deputy chief of staff for George W. Bush. David Plouffe was the campaign advisor for Barack Obama. Obviously, two different political parties, but I loved their banter. I loved their collaboration, their insights on life in a campaign.
Yep.
And, this election cycle and insights into life in the White House from not the president's point of view, obviously. And I thought it was very interesting. My two big takeaways was that Karl Rove said that the three biggest issues in this election cycle are inflation, immigration, and the economy, and that the discussion that the candidates have to take, that the American people are interested and, the world are interested in hearing, is that this has to be about change and not about the future or the past. And Plouffe said that in a presidential campaign versus in state or local campaigns, the candidate matters first and foremost because, the way that our government's set up.
Yeah. No, I thought it was really, phenomenal. There was a point in the presentation where it was a packed room and you could hear a pin drop. Everybody was so enthralled with the interaction between these two individuals. I really find it interesting that, when you're running a campaign, obviously you want all the attention to be on the candidate. So you really don't get to know very much the personalities of the people that are running the campaign. And I really love getting that behind the scenes because they were hilarious and incredibly knowledgeable. And, it looks like they have a real relationship with each other. And, definitely it's a show they can take on the road for years. And the stories were phenomenal. So definitely I agree with you. That was one of the highlights. And it's just one of those interesting dynamics that when you go to this state conference in real estate, you get to see things beyond that.
Right.
And so, yeah, I thought that was incredible for sure.
Well, and as we've discussed on the show before, advocacy is so much at the heart of what we do. And that was something that I saw in ICSC, right? So both ICSC and Florida Realtors have their own PACs. They're both real estate related, right? So they're not party related. And I talked to ICSC's head of the PAC, and her comment was that she says, yeah, it's really hard to fundraise because people think that you're raising for one party or another. Right. And she goes, we're actually between 52 and 48% or 49. She's every single time, right, but not always the same split between Democrats and Republicans. And that's the same number, that more or less kind of the same stats that we see in Florida Realtors PAC. And so these PACs are both very, very issue-based, very specific. ICSC is even more specific than Florida Realtors is, because Florida Realtors is private property rights, the environment, anything that can affect that. And ICSC is very specific to commercial real estate investment, retail, tax, etc. But so I loved that, and the importance, they both want to have a seat at the table, right?
Correct. I also like that the first couple of days is always commercial centric, right? CCIM has their state meetings there, and we usually start on day one with a couple of education CCIM and Florida Realtors commercial sessions, and then we have a networking event. And we got a presentation by an advisor to the Atlanta Fed, and the presentation was really interesting because it brought up 2 points that I think what was most interesting is the conversations during the networking hour about how people broke down that information. And one of them had to do with multifamily as an asset class nationwide and compared to Florida. And one of the things that was brought up is that the numbers suggest that there's a higher vacancy factor of multifamily in Florida than the rest of the nation by about a little bit less than 2 percentage points, which most of the practitioners feel that they're not seeing it, right? In their clients, none of their clients has a vacancy factor above 5%, right? And so a lot of the conversation turned around where they're maybe looking at these new projects that are coming on board, luxury, high-end projects, and, as those projects get absorbed into the marketplace, then that might throw off the numbers. But in reality, they're not seeing that. And the other one that I thought was most interesting, and I think most important for listeners of this podcast and anyone interested in commercial real estate, is that banks are having a very difficult time in getting what they consider to be good valuations or accurate valuations of a property. I know Brian Bailey from the Atlanta Fed is the one that made the presentation, and he said he spoke about a specific portfolio, and they were evaluating the portfolio, and they gave it to 7 different appraisers, and they got 7 different valuation numbers, and they range from $8 to $32 billion. So, when you have these wide interpretations of value, we've spoken before that an appraisal is an opinion of value. When you have these wide interpretations of value, it's very difficult for the bank to feel comfortable, right? Even when they're approaching things from a conservative perspective, that the value that they are settling on is the right value, right? And of course, they're going to lend on a percentage of that value, and they're going to lend based on the cap rate that the investment vehicle is generating. So what they're doing is they're adding 100 to 200 basis points to the cap rate. So they're by increasing the cap rate, which basically increases the loan to value and increases the equity input that the investor has to make when they're buying this property. So that I thought was very interesting and very telling about where we are in the market, where there's a transition happening, and banks want to be ultra conservative in how a property is being valued.
I agree, and I thought that was interesting to your point, the conversations that we had afterwards. And I think it depended, we were listening to we were talking with a lot of the agents and brokers in Southeast Florida, right, which has seen incredible demand. So those aren't, maybe we're not seeing the vacancies that maybe Tampa is seeing. So when you do a whole state, thing, and again, to your point, it's not just the high end, it's also not just just where in Florida the multifamily vacancies are that might be higher and therefore driving up the state overall, but also, to your point, the asset class. One of the things that I found super interesting that surprised me a little bit, just given the market that we're in terms of financing and the fact that we're in, the market has slowed down and we're hearing that housing starts and everything else are a lot slower and way under where they're going to need to be, is I went to the Realtors Land Institute meeting. Oh. And that was fascinating. It was amazing. First of all, there's a lot of stuff selling, especially on the west coast of Florida, which makes sense, right? The west coast of Florida, from like Fort Myers north, is not as dense. It's not nowhere near as populated as Southeast Florida is. And everything that was selling was pretty much single family. So there were a lot of single family residential lots, and they talked about that. And they also talked about larger lots that were being sold to national developers such as Pulte and Horton. So I thought that was super interesting.
You really were, really excited about that session. I didn't get a chance to go, but you really enjoyed it.
Yeah, there was I love it because, beneath it all is the land, or some such thing that we always say. And to me, if land is selling, it gives me a longer term picture of what, especially to nationals, right? Yeah. And big developments. I mean, there was one that was selling that went under contract, not went under contract, but it sold recently. And it was, let me see if I can find my note. Anyway, I took a picture of it. It was like 900 acres. No, I think they're building 900 homes. And it was over by like Lehigh Acres and that whole area, so Lehigh, LaBelle. And to me, that's awesome because it's further inland. It's not coastal, so it's going to be more first-time home buyers. They have so many great economic drivers over in that area with, they have the airport, they have Florida Gulf Coast University, which the new dean is just doing incredible things. So that one's constantly growing. They're spending a ton of money on improvements to both the airport and the hospital. So that showed me that area is still growing. And then what's funny is that seeing all that land information on the Florida Realtor side and then going to ICSC, there was a presentation by Dwayne Diller. He's the founder of Woolbright Development, and he was talking about how fast Florida is growing. And he said, look, we're going to grow by like 1.5% a year over the next 25 years. And we're going to go from a current population in 2024 baseline of 23 million to 33 million by 2050. And we're not building retail. And so there's this huge need for retail. So I thought it was interesting to see how those things combined. And if you think about the saying, retail follows rooftops, all of these land sales with new development. So here we go, connecting the dots on the information that we're getting from different sources across the board. And to me, I'm, data geeks. We love this stuff. So to me, that was fascinating because it shows where the growth is, where the opportunity is, where people are moving. A lot of people are being priced out. People, whether it's residents, investors, retail, office, et cetera, are being priced out of the Miami market. So then you get to see, okay, if the billionaires are moving to Miami, then where are other people that also want to come, whether they're retirees or young families or millennials, where are they going to be moving to within the state of Florida? Yeah. And this huge overall picture gave us a really good snapshot.
And there were new markets that were mentioned. Sebring was mentioned in a couple of sessions. I think that it's a really interesting dynamic. And what I love about that presentation that you saw was that the long-term view, which we always advocate for and we always speak about, which is, 2050 is 26 years away, 25 and a half years away, whatever. It's not that far away comparatively. And if you really think about it, a growth of 1.5% is a very sustainable growth, right? It's
moderate,
very moderate, which is wonderful. And I always feel that when we want to get a grasp on the market, we got to look at the macro and then we look at the micro. But the macro informs the micro.
Right. So, for example, taking what you were just saying about the 10% vacancy rate and everything else. Well, if this is true, right? If what Dwayne was saying is true, which I believe it to be so, I mean, Will Bright's data is, I mean, this guy is mind-blowingly brilliant. And so if this is true, then 10% vacancy is nothing. And you join that with housing starts, which we know because we did so much building during 2022, 23, et cetera, that we might have a little bit of a glut. Given this, don't worry, it's going to be absorbed. No need to panic. So for me, having that overall big picture was amazing. And then at ICSC, there were a ton of economic development entities there. The city of Tamarack was there. I think Margate was there. Northport was there. Orange County. Like, there were so many people that are growing their cities and their communities. And one of them that was great was North Fort Myers. They're doing a big push in North Fort Myers, and I posted something I think like the day that I was coming back, because again it goes into not to keep talking about advocacy and everything, but we were talking about how what happens locally politically can really affect whether a community grows or stagnates, and whether it grows thoughtfully and conscientiously or whether it just grows haphazardly because now all of a sudden they realize that everything's passed them by, so they...
Yeah, and I think you in your post, remind me of the post, but it had something to do with their approach to zoning and development.
Yeah, so it was...
By the way, if I may, while you're looking at that, of course, it's going to sound self-serving, but Jennifer is a great follow in LinkedIn. She really is. You do put a lot of great information in there. So
thanks. My husband did ask me why I posted about our grand puppy today, and I'm like, didn't you read it? It's because it's no wonder with all these people buying cute little puppies that the pet supply industry and retail is skyrocketing. So anyway, so even if it's a puppy or an ice cream cone, I'm probably tying it to real estate. But anyway, this is Alina D. Ray. She's the director of development services for the city of Northport, which is small. It's 100,000 population, but their annual growth rate is 6%. Wow. So that, and they saw that, and they're like, it's a city of Northport, and they're home of the Atlanta Braves spring training.
We won't hold that against them.
They're growing rapidly. Well, that tells you who some of their demographic is, right? So the East Coast usually, the East Coast of Florida is usually a lot more, obviously, East Coast attracting, right? We get people from Boston, New York, DC, etc. But when you go over to the West Coast, you get more of the Midwest, Chicago, Atlanta, etc. So what they did is they found something similar to one of the posts or one of the episodes that we did where we talked about the issues with South Miami, is they realized that they weren't attracting developers, they weren't developer friendly, their comprehensive land use plan made no sense. So and a lot of it was because of who was in charge in the city council, right? Yeah. So the residents themselves started to notice this and obviously voted people out. But she said now a lot of these people probably won't get reelected because of the growth that's going on. But she said we can either be a part of change and control it, or we can have it just take us over. So what they did is they streamlined the permitting process and made it way more developer friendly before you have to run all over. So they did something a little bit similar to what Miami Gardens did, where they have a get together and everybody meets at the beginning and all the stakeholders get together. They used to have public hearings for everything. So now if the development meets the zoning codes, then all the permits are done concurrently and there's no need for a public hearing, whereas before there were two. So she said just the one change of the public hearings cut 4 months off of the whole process. Well, we know that time is money, and the longer it takes to develop, the more expensive the development is, and that all leads to affordability. So I loved seeing that, and I loved seeing how many economic development councils, they all call themselves something different, but we are going to do a series on that too. So
another thing that I wanted to mention, and I want to give this out because where I find a lot of value in going to these conferences is that I'm often sitting, and it doesn't happen in every room, of course, but but inevitably, in at least one session, you're going to be sitting in a room. They're going to be discussing something that you either have never heard of before, you've heard it but don't fully understand it. Right? It's not 100% pertinent to your business, so you don't follow it through, and you get like an aha moment, right? And then, in a lot of ways, you demystify your own industry by attending, because you now are learning something that a segment of the practitioners are understanding. And a lot of this has to do with economic forces, right? And so I wanted to share with you, one of the cool things that was discussed was this idea of carry trade. Right. And so, a lot of times when I hear new terms, oftentimes it's being explained by someone that inadvertently believes that everybody really understands it at a basic level. So, I end up doing a lot of research after, and then that's how I learn. That's how a lot of people learn. But let me tell you about carry trade, because I thought it was an interesting dynamic when it comes to the forces. You took the picture of we're both looking at the picture of the slide because it was really interesting. So carry
so
trade,
pertinent to Florida.
Oh, it's extremely pertinent to Florida, because most foreign investors, they invest in Florida. We know those numbers apply. So this is pertinent. Carry trade is when you borrow in a lower rate currency and deploy the proceeds into a higher yielding assets elsewhere. So the example is that if you borrow money in a low rate environment like Japan, right, that has a 0.5%, and you're buying high rate instruments, you're buying commercial real estate, for example, in a foreign country, like U.S. Treasuries are at 4%. You borrow 0.5 to invest in something that is giving you a 4% return. So in the difference, you're making 3.5%, for example, right? But you do that also in commercial real estate, where the yield, right, is a lot higher than the U.S. Treasury at 4%. So between 2010 and 2023, foreign investors accounted for 12% of all U.S. commercial real estate investment. So why are these things connected? Because if the carry trade is negatively impacted, foreign investors could slow their investments in U.S. commercial real estate. So if Japan raises their rates, right, then it's not going to make sense for them to borrow and
borrow their money to invest
exactly.
Here. Right.
So I thought that was really a cool thing, and I wanted to bring it up because this is a podcast about demystifying commercial real estate, and I've been in conferences where everybody goes, we listen. Most people they act like they know what they just heard, right? But it's a process, and it's great to be in a room where you're being told something that you never knew before, and that it requires a little bit of research. But I just love, that's one thing about the conferences that I love is, when you're listening to something, it's brand new to you, and now I'll never forget what carry trade is,
right,
and how it affects.
Well, and the other thing about conferences that we go to a lot of conferences, and I always say you get a lot of takeaways, but if you don't apply any of the takeaways to your business, what good is knowledge if you're not applying it to your business, right? Exactly. So for me, this was huge because it tells you where you can start looking as those interest rates change, which we're in a market right now where interest rates are changing. Where would you be able to market? Whose interest rate is super low? And I remember I have a client who he lives in Ecuador, but he does this all the time. When we had really low interest rates here, he was borrowing money here and investing somewhere else. I can't remember where he was investing, but he was investing in something else overseas. I want to say it was in Asia somewhere. So super, super interesting, but you have to be able to figure out when you go to these conferences, how are you going to apply what you learned to your business? Another common theme that I heard when I was at both of them is several people were commenting at booths or on the exhibition hall about how it seemed like attendance was significantly lower than last year. I didn't notice it really because I'm not paying attention to how many people are there. It always seems like there are a lot of people. You're constantly having meetings. I mean, you and I.
But how was ICSC?
I heard that. I heard that it was down, but I can't comment on that because I don't know. I didn't call ICSC to see what numbers are. I mean, it literally, we just ended on Tuesday afternoon, so I don't know if they have totals yet, but people were commenting on that. And so then it became like, why are these trips becoming less relevant or whatever? And I said, well, look at the market. A lot of people are having their worst years, 23 and 24 in commercial real estate. Even the residential real estate has kind of slowed because of the interest rate environments and everything. So maybe people are cutting back. I have to tell you, if you're cutting back on conferences because you're having a bad year, you're being counterintuitive. You really should be going to every conference you can if you're having a slow year, because you're going to be networking, you're going to be learning stuff that you didn't know. And I really do think that those brokers who are still plugging away and doing what they always do, whether the market is high, low, or neutral, are going to be way better positioned when the market does turn around. And we know it's going to. It always does. And we've talked about this before. There's a ton of powder on the sidelines. It's just that there's a lot going on. You know, everyone's still coming kind of out of all the crazy upsets that happened during COVID. We've got a big election year. Interest rates skyrocketed in a very short period of time. So all of those unsettling factors make for an unsettled market. But the minute things settle down, I fully believe that real estate across the board is going to take off because there's so much pent demand. And I was actually listening, one of my favorite shows is Bloomberg Surveillance, and I never get to watch it except when I travel because I don't have cable. But they were talking about, they had a guest on, and I can't remember who the guest was, but they said that that's part of the issue with the Fed, not just in the United States, but overseas, you know, all of the different in other countries or Fed equivalents in other countries playing with interest rates right now, is that they're afraid that if they drop too fast, there's so much pent demand for buying big ticket items like real estate. That they could set off inflation again. And same thing, we've been hearing about how construction starts are down. Well, so if construction starts are down, supply and demand, construction costs are going to come down, all that's going to come down. So the minute that all of a sudden interest rates come down, if they come down too fast, then all of a sudden all of those inflationary pressures are going to take off again. So, but that just tells me that everybody is seeing the same thing. There's a lot of pent-up demand waiting on the sidelines. So if you've decided to check out of real estate and you're not networking and you're not building your pipeline, I think you're going to miss the next I
agree. And I think that there is something to be said about the energy that's in the place, whether, you know, it's a little bit less people, but I don't think it's an unknown secret in real estate. And I don't know if it happens in other industries. I'm assuming it does, but when you're in sales, it might be the same way. But something happens when you leave. You know, all of a sudden you're getting calls. I don't know what it is about that thing, but you set up a trip, you go on a trip, and you know, I remember early on in my career, my broker was actually commenting to another agent, and you know, she was complaining about, you know, things are slow and all that stuff, and she goes like, book yourself a 3-day trip, just go away, you know, and true to the fact, you know, she started getting calls. I don't know what it is.
I laugh because Carlos tells me that all the time. He goes, you haven't been bringing in a lot of deals. You haven't been closing a lot of deals, that your deal flows slow down. Go on a trip.
Exactly. Did you see less, you know, because ICSC is very driven by the expo, right? You have a lot of opportunity to speak to retailers all throughout the nation and all throughout the state of Florida. But did you see less retailers? I mean,
no, there were a lot of retailers. People are still moving here. We did have a group of us had a really interesting conversation because I kept asking, you know, ICSC is all retail for those of our listeners who don't know. So, you know, you get a lot of strip center owners, shopping center owners, Publix is there. You get a lot of the national chains there representing that are expanding. And there are a lot of national retailers that are still looking at Florida. Some retailers like Sephora are looking at much smaller footprints in different locations, whereas before they always wanted to be in a mall. Now they're okay being in a smaller center, smaller footprint, because they're trying to go to where their customers are going. But one of the conversations we had was about triple nets and the cost of insurance and how much pushback we were seeing, if any, from, you know, smaller local retailers, and people in the restaurant industry were definitely saying huge issue. A lot of locals are not going to make it. A lot of nationals aren't going to make it because the pass-throughs have been so high. Not the big nationals, but I'm talking about restaurant groups that might have a restaurant in Chicago and a similar one in New York, and then they came down here, right? So they're not necessarily a big national chain, but they have locations in more than one state, and we're seeing some of that pressure. And there was a guy there from the nationals, and he's like, oh, that's why everybody, wants nationals and why nationals are doing so well, because we can afford to pay no matter what. Right. And my comment on that was, if I'm a landlord, I'm afraid of your comment, because if you only have nationals in your community or in your retail center, you're gonna eventually, I think, in my personal opinion, die. Because if every single place has just the nationals, and that Lincoln Road is a prime example. Here was this very successful road in Miami Beach, Lincoln Road. It was super popular with tourists. It was it was where all the locals would go because it's a closed street. You can stroll around. Amazing. Well, it was doing so well that investors came in, bought up the space, cleared it out, and brought in nationals. And soon it was like an open street strip mall. The mom and pops couldn't afford the rent. So everything that made that street so incredibly unique was a local chain. Well, I'm sorry, as a local, I'm not going there, right? Because I can go to my neighborhood mall instead of driving. I don't live near South Beach, so I don't have to drive to South Beach, whereas before I would, So in my opinion, they killed that
foot traffic is really being generated by the food and beverage vendors there rather than...
And if you're not unique and it's another national chain that I can get in any mall in any city, what makes Lincoln Road unique? So we had that conversation. The national was not very happy with me, and it was funny because a couple of the tenant reps that were there that represent restaurants said, we're seeing that as a problem, but not every single community only wants nationals. And nationals are great. We love them. We love having them, but they can't be the only one who's in a center or in a community, because it kills the personality of the community. So,
well, one of the things that we were discussing before the podcast is that, if you didn't get a chance to attend ICSC or Florida Realtors Conference, you have an opportunity coming up in our backyard here in South Florida, in Hollywood, Florida, at the Hard Rock Hotel and Casino. We have the CCIM Global Symposium and NAR C5 Conference, which is coming up September 17th, 18th, and 19th. We're very excited. We're both going to be attending, and there's going to be a lot of great presentation. Also, we have Dan Marino as a keynote speaker, so that's always a plus here in South Florida. Very excited. This is the third iteration, or the fourth. No, this is the fourth year of C5, the second year, as a collaboration with CCIM. Fourth year, and this is the second year with the CCIM collaboration, which is very exciting because every year it has gotten better, and we're very excited for the presentations. And one of the things that I found out in after Florida Realtors, I went to Chicago for the leadership conference at NAR, and I found out that there is a panel that is going to be focused on the Live Local Act, and that Senator Calatayud, who was one of the authors, sponsors, and sponsors of the Live Local Act, is going to be there. So I'm very excited to be able to present this piece of legislation and the effects that it's had to a national audience. So it's going to be exciting to watch.
And in addition to Dan Marino and the senator, both superstars, obviously, in their own right, we have a lot of great speakers that if you've listened to this podcast, you're going to see there if you go. We've got Beth Azor is going to be there, Michael Bull from Bull Realty, Emily Line, who was one of our guest speakers, Dina Zimmerman, Lawrence Young, Cynthia Shelton, Kevin Sears, the president of NAR, Bob Nicol. Oh my God, if anyone hasn't followed Bob out of New York City, amazing. And he and Fariz are doing some amazing stuff with their new brokerage. So definitely an all-stars. And then there's many, many more. So it's going to be really, really informative. Absolutely. So if you're one of those who cut conferences out, this is your chance to get local.
Absolutely. And they have day passes. So it's a great time to do it. We'll put a link at the bottom of it for anybody who is interested. All right, Jennifer, do you have your stat of the day?
I used it when I was talking about the growth rate.
Well, I'll tell you, this I think it's interesting because you were alluding to it. And of course, we're close to September 18th where everyone is expecting a rate cut. But in the first quarter of 2024, mortgage originations of commercial real estate rose by 27%. And that was driven by increases in hotel, healthcare, and the industrial sector, despite decreases in retail, office, and multifamily properties. So it's really interesting. I always find it really great when I hear about what has happened in hospitality and hotels, right? Because not too long ago, during COVID, the expectation was that, that was going to be an asset class that was going to be hurting for a very, very long time. And there's been great recuperation there. But I do find it interesting that we have that increase in mortgage originations in commercial real estate because we know that the credit crunch has been difficult for commercial real estate. But I do find it interesting that we're seeing that uptick.
All right, I've got my stats now. This is also from Dwayne Stiller with Woolbright. It's from his presentation. Since my first stat, I blew it and used it. So the Florida major markets, Miami, Broward, Palm Beach, Naples, Fort Myers, Sarasota, Bradenton, Tampa, Orlando, and Jacksonville. The total projects in 2023 in all of those markets were only 6 built, 2 in Miami, 1 in Sarasota, Bradenton, 3 in Orlando, for a gross total of 894. In 2024, even less was built, 717,000 gross leasable area. And in 2025, there are only 3 projects, 1 in Miami, 84,000, 1 in Broward, and 1 in Orlando, for a total of 620,000. So he says we are so grossly underbuilding retail for the population that's coming.
Right. Well, but it also says that in 2023, 24, and 25, we're adding 2.1 million square feet in total, but that's significantly below. And this is retail, of course.
Retail.
Right?
This is only retail.
Interesting. All right. Well, awesome, everybody. Thank you again for joining us on another episode of Between Two Chairs. We would love to hear your comments, especially in regards to retail and how you guys are seeing the market. And we always encourage you to reach out to us. Let us know if there are any topics specifically that you want us to cover. Your feedback is very, very much appreciated. And we really look forward to continuing this project, creating these podcasts. All right.
Hope to see you at C5.
Absolutely.
If you are at C5, come say hello.
Absolutely. All the best.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.